Hello, thank you for joining us for Unite for Sight's webinar about funding for social impact. My name is Jennifer Staple-Clark, and I'm founder and Chief Executive Officer of Unite for Sight. I'll briefly introduce to you Unite for Sight, review the webinar logistics, and then we'll hear from our 7 expert panelists. Unite for Sight is a global health nonprofit organization that promotes high-quality care for all. We offer extensive global health and social entrepreneurship education programs. Our Global Health University program offers a free webinar series, including today's webinar, and we also offer 20 online certificate programs for students and professionals, and many students and professionals pursue these programs for professional development as well as academic credit through their universities, for example. And the certificate topics range from a certificate in cultural competency and a certificate in global health research to a certificate in responsible NGO management. We have upcoming free webinars, which are scheduled on January 21st about careers in global health and social entrepreneurship. And we will have many additional webinars during February, March, and April and beyond as well. And we encourage you to register for these free upcoming webinars at uniteforsight.org/webinars. Additional educational opportunities for students and professionals includes participation in Unite for Sight's annual Global Health and Innovation Conference. And we have this conference is coming up on March 28th and 29th, 2015 at Yale University. And the conference this year newly includes a GHIC Innovation Prize, which is a $10,000 and a $5,000 cash prize that is awarded to the 2 best social enterprise pitches that are presented at the 2015 conference. Both students and professionals, as well as nonprofit and for-profit organizations, are eligible to apply for the GHIC Innovation Prize. And the prize supports outstanding early stage and startup ideas, programs, and organizations which are locally developed and locally responsible. We also have healthcare delivery programs that provide care to patients living in extreme poverty. And we partner with phenomenal local eye clinics in Ghana, Honduras, and India to provide quality eye care to patients who are otherwise unable to access or afford care. And these programs are locally led and managed by the local medical professionals. And through these programs, our collaborations with the local clinics have provided eye care to 1.9 million people by local doctors during the past decade, including more than 87,000 sight-restoring surgeries by the local ophthalmologists. Unite for Sight is the world's only organization that is a healthcare delivery organization that also offers immersive global health education and social entrepreneurship opportunities for students and professionals. And these participants support and learn from the local doctors in Ghana, Honduras, and India as the local doctors provide care to patients living in poverty in villages, slums, and refugee camps. So the participants have an opportunity to learn from the local medical professionals about patient barriers to care and about effective strategies to reach the hardest to reach patients who are otherwise unable to access or afford care. The local doctors are social entrepreneurs who design effective and innovative strategies to eliminate the patient barriers to care. Now I'll describe the basic logistics of this webinar, and we're so delighted to have all of you with us today. We have 7 amazing panelists, and they have a wealth of expertise to share with you during this next hour. Each panelist will begin by giving a 2-minute introduction about themselves, their current role, and their key piece of guidance about funding. And then we'll dedicate the remaining time to your questions and answers. We received many stellar questions already submitted from you, our audience, by Monday's question submission deadline, and we selected the most common, most thoughtful questions to ask our panelists today. We also invite you to submit additional questions in the text box on the left of your webinar screen, and then we'll select additional questions to ask the panelists today as well. We also encourage you to tweet about the webinar, including your key lessons learned, by using the hashtag GHUwebinar, and you can see the hashtag in the webinar visuals on your screen. We'll proceed now with having our panelists introduce themselves in alphabetical order. I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panelist, Andy Bryant. Andy, please begin by introducing yourself, your background, and current role, and please share your key guidance about funding for social impact.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer and the team at Unite for Sight for putting together this webinar. It's a privilege and an honor to be a panelist with these other folks, several of whom are also partners of Segal Family Foundation. So I'm the Executive Director of Segal Family Foundation. Our mission is to improve the well-being of communities in sub-Saharan Africa. practice, this means that we'll deploy about $12 million in grant capital to about 200 NGOs across 20 countries in Africa in 2015. Our geographic focus is really on East Africa, where most of our giving goes, and we've got a great team on the ground there to focus this giving. Most of our partners have budgets, fairly small grassroots partners, budgets less than $1 million. Most are indigenously led, and about 1/3 of them have healthcare as their primary mission. My role as the executive director is to really build and support our great team in the U.S. and East Africa, learn from and leverage funding from other donors, and serve as the primary spokesperson for Segal Family Foundation and our values. My greatest advice are really more words of sympathy for early-stage health organizations and their founders. Donors are a pretty strange bunch. No two of us look or act much alike. My advice would be to really focus on building individualized engagement strategies for would-be supporters. Whether or not they like site visits or emails, or whether or not they appreciate heartstring anecdote stories versus quantitative metrics. And with those individualized strategies, you should be successful at cultivating some institutional funding. And fun fact, I worked for Unite for Sight as a volunteer in Tanzania doing some translation from Swahili to English for some visiting Unite for Sight folks. So long relationship with Jennifer and the gang. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Andy. And Gary Cohen, if you can please introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gary Cohen. I'm the co-founder and president of Healthcare Without Harm, and we're a nonprofit organization that works to embed an environmental health and sustainability framework into the healthcare sector. We have partners and projects in about 50 countries, and we've been around for about 18 years. My background is actually in philosophy, and I was excited by the idea of the ethics that healthcare is underpinned with in terms of the Hippocratic Oath, and the fact that healthcare itself was a major polluter of the environment, impacting people's health, was sort of the clarion call for setting up this organization. My key advice, I guess, are four quick things. One is the importance of vision. Never be shy to really lay out the vision that you see for the world, and really excite people at a deep spiritual and psychic level about your vision. Second, really focus on solutions. A lot of people really spend a lot of time talking about what's the problem and how bad it is, and you're coming forward with a solution that really matters, going to address this problem, hopefully at a scale that really is important. Three, really focus on who you are in your team. The talent that you have to actually deliver this solution is really, really important in terms, because people are investing in people, essentially. Donors are investing in people. And then the last thing, which builds on the previous speaker, is that I think that there's a very complicated set of relationships between donors and individuals, entrepreneurs and organizations, and especially foundations. And there's a lot of dysfunction in it. And typically, NGOs or entrepreneurs get into feeling like they're supplicants. And I think it's really critical that you not act like a supplicant, that you are offering the donor or the foundation an opportunity to invest in something that's deeply meaningful. And so the power relationship and how you present yourself, I think, is super, super important.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gary. And Tyler Gage, if you can also introduce yourself, please.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for having me. My name is Tyler Gage. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Runa. We're a hybrid organization, so we have for-profit and nonprofit entities working towards the collective mission of improving livelihoods for indigenous farming families in the Amazon. We've been working for about 6 years. We started as college kids out of Brown and have grown quite a lot. At this point, we support about 3,000 farming families in the Ecuadorian Amazon. We're expanding into Peru, and hopefully some people on the call might know us for, we produce a line of beverages that we sell in about 7,000 stores across the U.S. based on a unique super leaf tea that's only grown in Ecuador that our farmers produce. Brand name's Runa. We've been carving out a space around the idea of healthy energy as a product. So that's a basic rundown of what we do. In terms of fundraising, we've had a very diverse range because we have the experience of raising nonprofit funds and for-profit funds, both in Ecuador, Peru, U.S., and across the board. I would say, particularly given our setup and unique organizational structure, the best piece of advice I have or main focus is around mastering the art of storytelling. So obviously any sort of fundraising is around storytelling, how you communicate what your value is and what impact you're having. But in our case, we found it to be extremely important that we're able to communicate our story in different ways to different audiences. So as we're talking to for-profit investors in the beverage industry, it's a very different story, very different points of emphasis than if we're talking to nonprofit donors around forest conservation in the Amazon. So it's still both core to the mission of Runa, different facets, but not trying to tell the private investors who are interested in beverages about land use buffer zones for agroforestry protection on the Amazon, learning that that's not the best thing, and also on the Amazonian side, not to focus too much on the business side in the beverage industry has been very helpful. So, and not just developing sort of high-level guardrails in that way, but very, very specific points. What are exactly the examples, the case studies, the numbers that can speak to the people you're talking to? And doing a lot of background research, a lot of networking to understand whatever donor, investor you're speaking with so that you can speak exactly to what they care about, what their metrics are for impact or financial return, any and all of it. For us, the more we've grown as better storytellers and having that level of specificity and commitment, it's greatly improved our ability to raise funds.
Excellent. Thank you, Tyler. And our next panelist, Ashifi, if you can introduce yourself as well, please.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashifi Gogo. I'm the CEO and founder of Sproxil. Sproxil is a for-profit social enterprise that empowers consumers to avoid buying counterfeit products. Every year, too many people die from fake products. If you look at malaria and tuberculosis alone, over 700,000 people die every year from fake products. And counterfeiters make $200 billion in the process selling these fake pharmaceutical products. So there's quite a bit of injustice there that we rectify by providing legitimate, genuine manufacturers, branded and generic as well, with unique codes that they put on their products at the point of purchase, point of manufacture, that consumers can verify with their cell phone for free at a point of purchase. We have now expanded into multiple countries, so we have services in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, Pakistan, India, and our headquarters is based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. I would say to date, our experience with fundraising as a for-profit entity has taught us to pay even closer attention to the old advice of folks on the client, on the customer. One of the least discussed sources of funding for particularly for-profit enterprises in the social enterprise space is client revenue. And the great thing about client revenue is typically can withstand the shocks of changes in donor emphasis and focus regarding the fund usage of funds that they have and so on. And allows one to scale and reinforce the traction that they're obtaining with their solution with the financial means to further get into new markets and provide new services. So very quickly, I would say focus on the customer's needs and make sure that you have a business that is worthwhile in its own rights, because it's hard enough to run a regular business, let alone a social enterprise.
Terrific. Thank you. And Rich Leimsider, if you can introduce yourself as well, please.
Sure. Hi. Hi, Jennifer, and thanks. And hi, everyone on the webinar as well, and to the other panelists, too. My name is Rich Leimsider, and I'm the Vice President of Fellowship Programs at Echoing Green. We are a 30-year-old NGO based in the United States. And essentially for all of that time, we have been on the lookout for very early stage social entrepreneurs who have a big vision to make the world a better place. They're completely issue and geography agnostic. And this year, we just closed our application process. We had 3,165 business plans submitted, maybe from some of you on this call as well. So we're very excited about identifying our next class of Echoing Green Fellows. In speaking with the Echoing Green Fellows, and we've had 650 social entrepreneurs in our portfolio over the past 30 years, there are a number of really important lessons. I'll focus on three quick ones just in this initial minute. And I've been talking about these for several years, but I actually just realized a few months ago that all three of these lessons for fundraising are really well exemplified by the Ice Bucket Challenge that swept the United States a few months ago. So the first one is people give to people. Understanding that actually fundraising doesn't work solely on the merits of a powerful idea a lot of the time. It's about cultivating relationships, as Andy said at the very beginning. And in the Ice Bucket Challenge, it's very much about challenging one particular person to participate in this exercise. So people give to people. Secondly, you have to be specific. The most successful fundraisers don't simply invite people to donate towards a cause. They are very specific about how much this dollar will actually change. You'll support the lives of this many people. You'll enable us to build out this particular new program or service. In the Ice Bucket Challenge, it's very clear. We want you to dump a bucket of ice on your head, and the money is going to go to support a certain cause. So what you're asking the partner to do is very clear. And then thirdly, demonstrate urgency. There's lots of important and interesting challenges in the world. How do you demonstrate to a partner that the money needs to actually come now? And again, the Ice Bucket Challenge says if you're going to be a part of this thing, you have to dump the bucket of ice on your head in the next 24 hours. So people give to people, be specific, and demonstrate urgency. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rich. And Lisa, if you can also introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Lisa McCandless. I am the Director of Business Development for Living Goods. Quick background on Living Goods in case everyone does not know us. We recruit, train, and support networks of Avon-like community health promoters who go door to door in their communities, teaching families how to improve their health and wealth and selling life-changing products like simple treatments for malaria and diarrhea, safe delivery kits, fortified foods, clean cook stoves, etc. We just completed a randomized control trial that found that our model is reducing under 5 mortality by more than 25% in the areas that we work. So we're about to embark on a significant path of growth. So it's quite an exciting time at the organization. Just quickly to give you a little bit background about myself, I've been working in international development the last 10 years, primarily focusing on East and Southern Africa. And I've worked at a variety of different organizations in this space. So, a large NGO, Save the Children, to a donor darling men-failed social enterprise called Play Pumps, which some of you may have heard of. And most recently, before Living Goods, I was at Comonix International, which is a large international development consulting firm that's one of the largest recipients of USAID money. So when I was there, I was managing a pipeline of approximately $500 million per year and leading program design and development for large, $50 million projects across Africa. So on the fundraising and business development side, I've worked at these different types of organizations and in raising different types of capital. So whether it's from foundations, USAID, as I just mentioned, or high net worth individuals. A lot of my advice has already been said by the other panelists. I agree with what everyone has said. I think the one thing I would add to that or echo is, fundraising is all about relationships and making meaningful connections and people. So, I echo that there's not one approach. I think it's key to really understand your donors and your prospects, understand, what motivates them and what they're looking for. And the only other thing I would add as a BD person is be persistent and be ready to get some no's. If you're not getting any no's, you're probably not asking enough.
Terrific. Thank you, Lisa. And our final panelist, Gary White, please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here on this webinar. I'm Gary White. I'm co-founder and CEO of water.org. And being the last panel to introduce yourself, not only do you get to say, which is what I was going to say, is that everyone's really pretty much given all the good ideas. You actually have to follow the person who already said that everyone's already given the good ideas. So with that, I think that I would just take a little bit different tangent with what we do and in terms of my fundraising advice. And I think it's all kind of rooted back in the organization itself and what we're trying to do. And we are focused on drinking water supply and sanitation in developing countries, and we've helped about 3 million people gain access to those services. But what we're really trying to focus on is helping those at the base of the pyramid in the developing world tap into their intrinsic power as customers. And in that vein, what we're really doing is trying to help them get the financial tools that they need in order to be able to acquire a water connection at their home from a local utility, or a toilet at their home, or a water treatment device, or a rainwater harvesting and storage system, and to do that by getting access to microloans. And so that's really the essence of what we're doing now, is water credit and blending together microfinance with water and sanitation. And the fundraising advice that flows from that, I think, is trying to really set yourself apart with innovation and entrepreneurship. And with water credit, the conventional wisdom was that all the poor were too poor to be able to provide these services themselves. And we recognize that just really wasn't the case, and that we could help them, like I say, tap into this power as customers. And that really resonated with donors, because it really drives up the efficiency of what we're able to do to be able to reach more people with the same dollar by helping them tap into the capital markets versus just giving more grants and subsidizing water projects at 100%. So I think if you look out there now in terms of innovation in the nonprofit space, there's so many ways to raise funds now. You have Ashoka, you have Indiegogo, you have the Echo and Green Fellows, for instance, trying to support people in their ideas, and you even have like the Skoll Foundation, of which I'm fortunate to be a member of the Skoll family, as is Gary, the other Gary on the call, where people and foundations are really looking for those breakthrough ideas and being able to support those. So I think innovation and social entrepreneurship woven through your issue and thinking about things differently can really help lead to more funding.
Thank you so much, Gary, and thank you to all of our panelists. And now we'll proceed with the question and answer session. As mentioned, we received questions in advance from you, our webinar audience. And if you have any additional questions, please post them in the text box on the left of your webinar screen. So for our first question for Rich, oftentimes flashy and seemingly unique programs receive funding even if the program is not locally developed and locally responsible. How can programs stand out for funding when they are locally responsible and locally necessary but may not be considered flashy?
Thanks, Jennifer. I think this is a really important question, and it gets to kind of a fundamental issue, which is how do we, Echo and Green, other folks who are in the business of giving money away, but we're also a fundraising organization ourselves, and every year we go out to find the money from donor partners and others who are going to allow us to then give it to social entrepreneurs. How do we try to make sure the right money is going to the right places? And I think, honestly, to begin with, I think it's actually important that social entrepreneurs, people looking to raise money in the social sector, start with a little bit. I have this conversation pretty frequently with Echo and Green Fellows, and I start by saying, you are interested in making social change because you believe the world does not work as you wish it would. Most of the time it's because you're doing this work because you don't actually think society is doing a perfect job of allocating resources where they deserve to go. Well, guess what? Fundraising in the social sector is also part of that same society and is sometimes broken. So we simply don't get to have the luxury of assuming that if we create the best program that has the most merit to it, all the money is going to beat a path to our door. And you have to be realistic about the world we're in and what is the best way to raise your profile and to make that connection. One of the things I didn't get to talk about in the introductory remarks, and Jennifer, is it okay to take another minute and a half or so?
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't get to talk about in the introductory remarks is a concept that I find incredibly persuasive, which is the notion of powerful vulnerability. This is something that one of our early Echoing Green fellows, a woman named Vanessa Kirsch, who founded the organization New Profit, among others, she talked, I heard her speak years and years ago about this notion of powerful vulnerability. And what that means for a social sector leader is in any kind of conversation, especially around fundraising, but frankly lots of different conversations, it's important to understand how to walk the correct balance between, on the one hand, demonstrating that you are worth partnering with, you are worth investing in, you're powerful, you know what you're doing, you have your act together. But on the other hand, making sure you're also demonstrating a little bit of that vulnerability. The reality is that most donors and partners need to see themselves in your work. And if you come in saying, we've got it all figured out, we've got all the money lined up, it's actually pretty hard for people to donate, to invest, to work with you. So it's not just about demonstrating how powerful you are, but it's also not overdoing the vulnerability. You don't want to walk in and say, I'm a total mess, we don't know what we're doing, please help us right now. So you can't walk in uniformly vulnerable, but you have to sort of understand how do you navigate that path in any particular conversation and with any particular relationship of demonstrating, hey, we know what we're doing, we have a pretty good idea of how to change the world, but in fact, we absolutely can't do it without your help. And I think finding that, it's not easy, but finding that powerfully vulnerable way of presenting is one of the best ways to demonstrate the importance of your work and the importance of working with you to any potential funder.
Thank you so much, Rich, for your terrific insight. Our next question is for Gary White. What is the best way to ensure that funders and NGOs move past outputs and focus instead on outcomes and evidence-based decision-making?
Well, certainly there's been a lot of discussion about outputs, outcomes, goals, objectives, and so on in the international development sector and even in the water sector. And I think that's good to a point. I think that outputs can be very important in our business. How many people are getting access to a water connection or are able to construct a toilet, and those are important, and we do focus on those actually. And then of course we want to look at the outcomes in terms of are people actually using those resources and those improvements. But I think what we try to do is kind of come back from this basic principle that we're trying to get at and look at it in terms of how do we help people not just get a free toilet or a subsidized toilet or a water solution, but how do we help them be empowered to make the decision as to what water or sanitation solution is right for them. Once you can kind of make that leap and help them get empowered to make that decision, then all of a sudden what you see built into this is much more of a demand-driven approach to this that diminish the metrics to a certain extent because people are not going to take out that microloan to get that water connection at their home if they don't see intrinsic value in that for them with respect to their water needs. So because they have to repay that loan. And so what we're trying to do is kind of substitute in this demand-driven kind of a market forces approach to ensuring that when we take our donors' funds and invest them in catalyzing these loan funds, that those impacts and those outcomes are going to happen. And so we are concerned about the number of people that we reach with that improvement, but making sure that for our perspective with loans, you want to make sure that the loan is used for the intended purpose and not something else. So that's one of the things that we measure and report back to in terms of outcomes. But we then do also look down the road in terms of those facilities being used. So we don't just trust that the market is going to work for this. We do also look at that ongoing usage of that infrastructure. So I think the thing to take away from this to kind of extrapolate more to the general level is the more that you can institute initiatives that have a real demand-driven approach to them, and that really take on board the user's preferences, the beneficiary's preferences, and they have a stake in it, then it can actually become much more straightforward to show and demonstrate value to donors, whether you call those outputs, outcomes, or whatever.
Thank you so much, Gary. And for our next question for Gary Cohen, what recommendations do you have for NGOs to pursue and secure multi-year funding instead of only single-year funding?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's a matter of building relationships. It's extremely unlikely that with a new donor you're going to get multi-year funding unless you're really lucky. But I think part of it has been said is that not only are you telling a story initially to get the initial funding and doing a good job of that storytelling, but there's a storytelling arc that runs through the relationship so that as you're doing work and as you're having successes, you're informing your donors, investors along the way, along the course of the year so that they're at the edge of their seats. Like, what are they doing now? Wow, look at that. And so I think it's building those relationships so that those single-year kind of test grants, as it were, turn into multi-year funding, because they ultimately, you want them to see your organization as not just delivering outputs or outcomes, but in a way playing a fundamentally important role in whatever ecosystem you're operating in. And so I think that kind of larger positioning and that larger storytelling is what can lead to multi-year funding.
Thank you, Gary. And our next question is for both Rich and Andy. Perhaps Andy can begin and then Rich can offer any additional insight. What are the common pitfalls that you see in funding applications?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I think the main one we see is being unfamiliar. We still accept unsolicited applications through our online grant platform. And when it doesn't come with a recommendation or a referral to a trusted partner or a peer donor, it's really hard to spend too much time looking at these. So I encourage people to do a little bit of legwork and try to develop some kind of common tie with folks you're asking for money, whether it's another donor or another NGO.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andy. And Rich, do you have additional insight?
Sure. I have thoughts. I'll let the folks on the call decide whether it's insightful. I think in terms of a pitfall or sort of a common mistake, I think one thing is that it's really important for any leader in an organization to remind themselves that they are likely to be much more expert and knowledgeable about a particular community, issue, or field than the average donor partner or person that they're working with about soliciting funding. And so it's actually important to be able to discuss the work, translate the work in general terms, in broad terminology, to not assume that the person you're presenting the application to knows all the jargon, the acronyms, and frankly knows all the super detailed nuance about how this works. And related to that, I sort of have a philosophy that, again, going back to my belief that people give to people, and it's about building these human relationships. For the most part, the individuals, the leaders of any social enterprise, are the best capable of telling the story in person, of building those human relationships. So I actually have a rule, which is we tell our fellows, when you're reaching out to a new partner or someone you've been introduced to, try to give them as little information as possible about your work, the minimum information that it takes to get the next conversation. So rather than sending them the 20-page PowerPoint or the report about your work, what that does is if you send them all that information, it gives them the false sense that they know everything they need to know about you, and if the document doesn't look interesting, they may just say no thanks and not speak further. Our rule is send the minimum possible information to get folks interested enough to have that phone call with you. And on the call, try to share the minimum amount of information that it takes to get invited to that in-person meeting. So don't overwhelm with too many facts, statistics, and figures. Try to get to that place where you can do the job of building those direct human relationships.
Thank you, Rich. Terrific. Lisa, what are the best ways to manage donors and to ensure that they are engaged as ongoing donors?
Sure. So I think we've touched on some of these themes throughout this call, but I think one thing that's really important is, really being specific, targeted, and strategic in your engagements with your donors. So first thinking about the content of what you're sharing, what about your work and model and organization resonates with that donor. A lot of our organizations touched a lot of different impact areas. So, for example, at Living Goods, we have some donors that really just care about our health impact, and sometimes even going beyond that about a very specific disease area. And there's other folks that just care about the economic opportunity we're providing to our micro-entrepreneurs. So I think it's important to understand what they care about so that you can be engaging them on that level and telling the stories around that piece of your work that's most interesting to them. And then second, what do those engagements look like? So some donors want constant communication. They want, a quarterly phone call. Others would prefer just, a standard report. And if they have questions, they'll call you. Some donors like to visit a lot. Others, don't. So I think really understanding what their expectations are and then making sure you're meeting those because they're not going to be the same for every donor. And then the one other thing I would add is, I think it's really important to think about how else can you engage your supporters. So what are other ways you can involve them in your work? For example, do you want to involve them in developing your business plan for the following year? Are you looking to develop your board, and might they have ideas of who could be on your board? I think the more and more you're able to engage them and the more and more buy-in they feel to your work, and feel like they're part responsible for your success as an organization, the more they're going to be engaged. So I think really thinking beyond the money, what is the other time, talent, and social capital that your funders can provide you and want to provide you, and how do you utilize that?
Thank you so much, Lisa. And Tyler, what are the best ways to engage and manage investors? How do you determine which investors to target?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's one of the ones that I've always found a little bit amusing as an entrepreneur. A lot of people will give you the advice that you should be very, very specific and very focused with what investors or donors you accept onto your team. And I thought it's always a funny image, like I have this stack of investor applications on my desk that I'm just sorting through and then picking out, among the 500 people that just want to throw money at me, which ones that I want on board. If that was reality, I think anybody on this call would be ecstatic, but I'm sure it's not a common experience at the very least. So a lot of what our reality has been is hustling to get in front of the right people, to tell them the Runa story, and to get them excited about what we're doing so that they can donate or invest. The baseline of that for us has been networking. So we've been very focused for a very long time on talking to anyone and everyone we possibly could who would have some interest from one angle or another in the world that is Runa. So whether that's beverage industry, the Amazon, alumni from our college, indigenous rights activism, anyone who had some minor interest in any of the core issues that we deal with, how can we get in front of them? How can we get a meeting? How can we send them some product? And just being incredibly dogged and incredibly persistent in that effort. So I would say that was the baseline. I think that goes an incredibly long way, particularly when in our early stages, I studied literary arts in college. My business partner studied marine bio, and we wanted to build a supply chain in the Amazon and start a beverage company. So that sounded quite crazy, and we had about zero credibility. So it took us starting from the ground up to bringing people on who were angel investors and donors who just believed in us. So that required a lot of time taking those meetings and looking for smaller donations and investments early on. So that's the first step, and then the second step is networking within networking. So as soon as we got someone on board to say, great, I'm going to invest $20,000 in Runa, we said, great, who else can you introduce me to? Is there anyone else I can get in front of that that's friends of friends, who is in the beverage industry, is a consumer packaged goods person, who's been to Ecuador in the last year and really loves the country? Anyone else we could get in front of, we were hyper-determined and hyper-focused on the one-offs and the plus ones to try and do fundraising. So especially if people are trying to look at angel investors or small donors, even working within big organizations, I found that it's such a funny game where, you might have somebody one time, he's like, hey, do you happen to know anybody in the media world, PR, we're trying to get stories out. You ask them once, they say, no, not really. Ask them again, no, not really. Ask them a third time, and they say, oh, actually, I totally forgot. My friend's like the head editor at the New York Times. You say, what? Well, I thought I asked you that 3 times, but just continuing to ask people, continuing to ask for help is really your job. And particularly on the investment side, a lot of people, if they're not active investors with you or just invest a little bit of money, might not always have their head in the game, so it's your job to take the weight on your shoulders. And then I think I really like in terms of managing investors, this notion of powerful vulnerability, where a lot of people that jumped on board with us early wanted to be involved. So we had this Pepsi executive who recently retired who wanted to help us out. And it was great. He was one of these guys who loved the beverage industry and had nothing to do because he retired. And the fact that we said, hey, Tim, we have 10 pages of questions around supply chain stuff. Can you please help us? That was the best thing in the world. And if we would have said that we had everything figured out, he probably wouldn't have wanted to work with us. So asking for help, making it interesting, bringing people into the game that you play and the questions you ask gets people very excited because they know that their energy, their time can contribute to something meaningful. So I think that powerful vulnerability tip is a very good one. I second that.
Excellent. Thank you, Tyler. And Gary White, what are the strategies to use with board members to demonstrate how important the board's role is in hitting fundraising goals?
Well, I think, first and foremost is working really hard on your recruiting of your board members and making sure that as you go out into the world and try to find them, that obviously you want them to be passionate about the cause, but you also want them to be able to really work on behalf of the cause. And I think that with the thing that people I think often fall short on is by trying to recruit board members by saying, it's not going to be that much work. It's not going to be that hard. We want you just because we think you can, bring a lot to the organization from whatever perspective. And frequently what, people are willing to jump in even if it is a lot of work. In fact, they might be more willing if they know that there's really going to be a substantive role for them. And so I think that's one thing, making sure as you're recruiting board members who understand that you do expect a lot of them. And no board member should ever be recruited, in my view, without having a discussion about giving and getting. And so if you're having that conversation with them up front, that 100% of board members always give to the organization, and you don't necessarily have to have a set amount, but that everybody gives, and that everybody is also comfortable with taking the mission out into the world and asking other people to give as well. So that's the first thing. Once you get those people on the board that you've had that candid conversation with up front, then I think it becomes a little bit easier than someone at that point saying, hey, I didn't sign up to give money. I signed up because I have great business strategy, so that's really just my role. So you avoid those kinds of pitfalls. And then once you have that on board, then I think you do need to continue to nudge board members. And, we have processes for that. We report out to the board the total board giving on a regular basis, and our board chair actually has one-on-one conversations with each board member annually about not only their financial contributions, but other things that they're contributing and what they want to contribute going forward. So there's very much a straightforward face-to-face enforcement kind of that everyone will give annually.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gary. And Andy, what have been your greatest lessons learned as a foundation to ensure that funding makes the greatest impact in the field?
Sure. It probably sounds kind of hokey, but for us, it's really about partnership and not paternalism. So on the funder side, and I think that just means developing a really respectful relationship with our grantee partners. And in practice, this means providing mostly unrestricted funding. By and large, folks know exactly where they should be spending their money, and so there's no reason to apply pesky earmarks. We also develop multi-year, really long-term relationships with partners and associated funding that expands those years. Another obvious thing, but unfortunately isn't done all that often on the donor side, is to try to streamline the reporting, make it as unburdensome as possible, as well as any associated asks on the time of what many times are sort of early stage fragile social entrepreneurs in their equally early stage organizations. And in order to, when we do ask them their time, we try to provide really sort of high-value capacity building. The way we do this is we have a team on the ground in East Africa. So having boots on the ground means that we can sort of empathize and understand the context of our partners a little bit better and be able to actually respond with substantive capacity building opportunities. And then I would say the other thing for funders is really, once you're in with an organization, you really have to sell out and be a proactive advocate for your grantee partners. It's really surprising how influential donor recommendations can be to one another, for better or worse. But our sort of vouch carries a lot of weight, and we got to be proactive in using it. And for the social entrepreneurs, I would say don't be afraid to push back with donors. You guys are the experts. It's not your job to change your model and metrics to meet our whims, but it is your job to convince us that your model and metrics are the right ones. And I think I would reference Lisa and the folks at Living Goods with this. I think to their credit, that a lot of folks like us, donors, ask them to partner with other folks and, teach their model to other people. And they really pushed back on this for a long time and said, no, we want to get it right. And then when they were ready on their own terms, they opened up sort of what's more or less a consulting shop where they teach other folks about the Living Goods Avon Lady model, and it's been really powerful and it's been done right. So those are my lessons learned.
Wonderful, Andy.
Thanks,
Thank
Andy.
you so much. And Gary Cohen, many individual donors and foundations only want to fund direct service, which leaves organizations without funding for infrastructure. What is the best way to work through this conundrum?
Well, they should all be like Andy and the Segal Foundation. They seem to have it right, which is it's really rare, and it's a gem I think in the funding community to find foundations that really get the idea of the importance of having your full infrastructure in place to deliver on what you're trying to do. And when you find those foundations or donors, then they're the most precious resource you have in terms of support. It often feels like that in some ways it's gone the wrong direction, and that there are more and more foundations that have their own theory of change and their own strategy, and then they treat the entrepreneurs as sort of, delivering one small piece of it. And I think it's super challenging in that way. So they just want to say, okay, you do that one thing, and then we've got these other three organizations that are doing that other thing, but we just want you to deliver that one narrow outcome. And I think there's a problem with the model. And so I think a lot of times we wind up having to try to insert some of our core infrastructural people into what are seen as sort of direct programmatic grants, which is complicated to do sometimes. Certainly, you can't put your finance people and some of those administrative infrastructures. We also just, as a standard matter, put 15% overhead into all the grants we get to try to cover that kind of stuff. But I think it's very important to all of us to be educating the funder community that if you want to deliver a meal that's finished, you can't just fund one or two ingredients. You got to fund the whole thing, and that's part of us. That's part of on us to educate the community that that's what you need to have successful organizations, successful entrepreneurs out in the field.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Gary. And Ashifi, several questions for you. First, how can projects and financial models best tap into host country financing?
Sure. So I would be one of the first to say that securing financing in local markets can be challenging. A majority of the donors are typically based outside the regions where their work is implemented, or the work that they fund is implemented. And so to be realistic, it is a hard task to find local supporters when you work in, say, in some of the African markets, such as what we do. However, the situation is changing. UBS, the large bank, recently published a report on how the wealthy Africans are giving back to projects within Africa, and they expect that the situation would improve. There'll be much more local donors given to local projects over time. That said, it is quite important, in my opinion, to align the initiatives that one would like to get funded locally with the interests that are local. And so far, the projects that secure a fair amount of financing locally are tied to education and health. So if you have priorities or you have an intervention or solution in that area, local financing is probably a better fit. If there are other interventions, it may actually be a little more challenging to do so. And there really isn't much wrong with securing financing overseas for projects to be implemented in specific localities. That's how a majority of the ecosystem works today.
Terrific. Thank you, Ashifi. And another question for you. How has your for-profit model helped to demonstrate scalability to investors and donors?
Sure. There's two things that are great about for-profits in the social enterprise space. One is, perhaps as with many other for-profits, you get much quicker feedback when you ask people to put a price tag on a service or a good that they value. And it's much easier to optimize the project or the initiative to either fail fast or see success a little sooner. So that's definitely a plus of the for-profit setup that we have. And specific to our instance, we work very often with either large multinational corporations or small medium enterprises that are local, based in India and so on, often pharmaceutical companies that aren't always very large. But typically they're used to working with for-profit companies when it comes to dealing with their supply chain issues around counterfeiting, around patient engagement, and so on. And so by structuring ourselves as a for-profit, it allows us to take one question off the table when we're having discussions with these partners as we scale our solution in the marketplace. I've realized that it's hard enough when all the stars are aligned to operate a great business that scales quite well, that you want to make it as easy as possible for your potential partner to say yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. And one additional question for you, Ashifi. What influenced your decision to set up Sproxil as a for-profit?
Sure. So the answer is quite similar to the one I previously gave, is that it's the most optimal route to market for the circumstances which we find ourselves in and the problem that we're trying to address.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Gary White, how do you engage local communities to help fund the local programs?
Well, with the water credit initiative that I mentioned earlier, it really is about having the local community buy-in, but even more so even individual household buy-in. And so, one of the real values that our donors see with that water credit model I mentioned before is the leverage that they get for their philanthropic capital. And where that comes in at the household level is that micro loan. So we are only paying, probably about 1/5 to 1/10 of the cost in terms of the philanthropy that we invest to kind of jumpstart these markets where people will actually be able to get to an MFI, a microfinance institution, and get a loan. So we are basically investing money to help microfinance institutions see this as a good business to get into. So we help them cover their startup costs, to do market research, to hire the right people, et cetera. And then these MFIs in turn go out into the marketplace and source capital. And then they use that capital they source locally to turn that into microloans for the individual households. And these loans are repaid at about 99%. And so what we're doing in terms of that community buy-in is, again, helping them tap into what the solutions are in terms of water and sanitation that best fit the needs for their family, and then have the financial tools that they need to go out and make that happen. And so we've been able, through the water credit program, I think we've invested somewhere in the neighborhood of about $10 million in philanthropic capital to jumpstart this, but our partners have now then secured about $80 million in capital locally. The only hitch that we start to see is in some countries that access to that capital isn't always that smooth and that easy. And so what we've now launched is actually an equity fund. So we are raising equity capital in the U.S. right now that we will then turn into loans for our microfinance partners in India to start with, and then they'll turn those into the micro loans. That'll get repaid back up to us, and we have a targeted financial return to our equity investors in the U.S. of 2%. And so we're always looking at ways that we can help the cost be shared with the market, but also the cost be shared through the beneficiaries.
Wonderful, thank you. And Tyler, what marketing and branding strategies have you found to be most essential to reach your intended customer? How have your marketing and branding strategies evolved since your company began?
Yeah, so it's definitely been a ride on the Runa front in terms of marketing and branding strategies. We've shifted a bunch of times. I mean, we're even 6 years into it now and still tweaking designs and brand strategy and messaging. I think particularly what was challenging for us is, I would assume would be a common challenge for other people on this call, is how do you balance the functionality of the product itself from a pure product delivery perspective with the importance of the mission, the impact, the story behind it. Early on, we started out thinking that the Amazon was the coolest place in the world and that every single person that drank Runa had to know every single little detail about the mission and the origin. Ultimately, we pivoted away from that, realizing that we compete on a beverage shelf, so we have a very limited amount of consumer catch the consumer to at least get interested in the brand as the hook. And over the last many years, we've been focusing more on functionality. So we have a product that has as much caffeine as coffee, double the antioxidants of a green tea, and a clean taste with no sugar. So very focused on communicating the functional benefits of the product, the WIFM, the what's in it for me. And actually now we're working back towards incorporating more of the mission story. But I think ultimately what would come from is you need to think about your communication platform as a bit of a pyramid, so that what your hook is into the brand or into your product isn't necessarily what's going to keep people loyal. So for us, we're still focused on, try this product. It tastes absolutely amazing, and you drink a bottle of Runa and you feel great. That's a great hook, easy to expand, easy to scale. But what we want to do more of is, as people try the product and they like it and they drink a bottle, that we can get them quickly into understanding the mission, the impact, the value, so that they get even more excited about the brand, want to buy it every day, want to tell their friends, and become loyalists. So I think it's been a big challenge for us trying to figure out how all those pieces fit together, but over time gaining a better sense of how we can differentiate between the hook, the lead of the communication, with the deeper backstory. And through sampling programs, that can be the edge, and then through PR, we can tell more of the story, has been a big process and been a big challenge. I also am a big believer generally in testing things. I think it's something that we had to learn a bit of the hard way in terms of trying to think that we had the right answers and then just roll it out full speed with national programs, et cetera. And I'm a very big fan of starting small. So if you have a great idea, you think it's the smartest thing in the world, and you want to test it on packaging, produce the absolute minimum amount of units as you can physically get away with. Pick one area and test it. Get as much feedback as you can, get some trial, get some data, quantitative, qualitative, and see if it works. Because once you put something in the market, the learning curve accelerates rapidly, so that you can really get some real feedback and then make your decisions to scale based on actual knowledge. So that was something that we learned the hard way early on, but as we've backed into that, it's been incredibly helpful and saved us lots of money.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tyler. And Lisa, what is the best way to cultivate donors so that they donate increasing amounts annually?
It's a good question. I think, I would start with the first question is, do they have the capacity to give more? And going back to an earlier point, really know your donors. So I think really doing your homework and not just asking to ask, but understanding, do you have a growing funding need, and is that donor able to give more resources? And then next, I would say ask. I think you'd be surprised how few people don't ask, and how often people just, continue if they have a multi-year grant of just asking for the renewal and not really going to that funder and saying, look, we're growing by X amount next year. Our funding gap is growing. We'd love to have you support us at X% more. And I think, on all points of donor engagement, I can't emphasize enough how important follow-up and follow-through is. It seems so simple, but we all get very busy and have massive to-do lists, and sometimes, things fall through the cracks. But I think it's just really important to do thorough follow-through and really be seen as your donors as really dependable, so that they know they can count on you and you're able to respond to them when they need you to. And then lastly, I would just quickly say if, it might not be funding that you need from that donor. So building on a point I mentioned earlier, are there other things they can contribute to the organization's growth? And really thinking strategically about the various people and, where do you think they can contribute the most in a way that they're going to be, proud to do it, happy to do it, and it's really going to deepen their engagement in your mission.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Lisa. And our final question for Tyler. What type of capital did you need to start your company, and how did you coordinate the initial funding?
Well, we needed any capital we could get to not die as an organization. Long story short, we moved to Ecuador 2 days after graduating from college with no money, so we were trying to make things happen, and we're trying to get funding from any source we possibly could for the first couple of years. I mean, we spent the first 3 years not having enough money to finish the month, pretty much every single month for about 3 years straight. We raised an ongoing convertible debt round for those people on the call that are for-profits or have some for-profit component of your organization. I highly recommend convertible debt as a very flexible, very easy to use early fundraising tool. It basically gives you the ability to not have to set a formal valuation, to open a formal equity round with set timelines, set share prices, but gives you the ability to take in capital on an ongoing rolling basis, which for people that have tight cash flows early on is very helpful, and gives the investors a way to get a bonus or a discount when you ultimately open an initial round. For us as a consumer packaged goods company, raising equity capital early stage is substantially difficult, so the convertible debt round gave us the ability to bring on investors with a longer timeline. We have a convertible debt round open for 2.5 years, which I wouldn't advise avoid it, but given the nature of that fundraising tool, we were able to really stretch it out. The other decision we made early, which is against conventional fundraising wisdom, but something that at least has helped out, we decided to take very small checks. So for most for-profit companies, the traditional wisdom is that you want to have few investors, you don't want to have people breathing down your neck and have an incredibly long cap table. We did the exact opposite. Early on, we took checks as small as $5,000 because for us, $5,000 went a pretty long way in Ecuador in the early stages, and we wanted to build a community. So we didn't think that bringing on a few dozen investors early would be a headache. We thought it would actually be an opportunity, because then we have people who wrote us a check, who committed to supporting us and committed to the Runa vision becoming reality, so we could hit them up for feedback on labels, for connections, for other investors, and we built this amazing community around us that really believes in Runa, that loves what we do, and has diverse networks and diverse sets of experience. So a lot of people would tell you that's idiotic, which I think in some cases it definitely is, at least from our experience, when we didn't have access to professional angel investors, venture capital funds, or even big donors early on. It was a very effective way to get enough capital so that we could run our pilot programs, show success in Ecuador, show commitment, and then get to the stage where we could raise additional capital. Our first big break came, we actually convinced the Ecuadorian national government to invest equity in our company in Ecuador. So we got them to invest about $500,000 of equity capital into our for-profit company in Ecuador. So we kind of got even outside the non-traditional realms of fundraising to look at actual government funding, and that has had a lot of strategic benefits on top of it.
Wonderful, Tyler. Thank you so much, and thank you for the phenomenal insight from all of our panelists and all that you've shared today of your expertise with the webinar audience. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much again.